and welcome back to the Online Collections Technology Think Tank. Hope the people who've joined us in the earlier sessions today have really enjoyed it as much as I have. It's been really good, really interesting. So now we're going to move into our next session 3 of the day, which is going to cover vulnerable customers and affordability, and a really interesting subject around technology. If we can, we're going to cover this off now. So really quick one though, just to flag up for new joiners, on your screen in front of you, you've got some options on the left-hand side. It's got information on the event speakers, also the supporter profile of Intrum, who are supporting this session. So thanks to those guys. And then it's also got, more importantly, the questions section on there. So if you've got any questions, I'd like to emphasize it, please put them forward. I'll try and reply to you individually, and then I'll put them to Vanessa and our panel, and we'll try and answer them in this session. If not, we'll answer these on the Credit Connect website post-event. So without further ado, let's address this subject, and I'm going to hand you over to Vanessa Northam from StepChange even, and she will introduce our panelists. Thanks, Vanessa.
Thanks very much, Colin. Well, welcome everybody if this is the first session that you've joined, and welcome back for those of you that are still with us. We will very much aim to finish this session bang on 12:30 because the Chancellor is due to make his announcement then, so hopefully you can all stay with us until then. So delighted to introduce our next panel on a subject which is obviously close to my heart. So let's introduce Charlotte Acutt, who is the Operations Income Manager at Southwark Council, Lietta, Pennucci, who's Senior Operations Manager at Intrum, and finally Erik Porter, who is a member of the Financial Services Consumer Panel and CEO of Cheddr. So welcome, panel. If you can all just give us a couple of minutes on the role that you play at your organisation, and specifically any insights from the last 6 months, and we'll start with Charlotte.
Good morning, everybody. So my name's Charlotte Acutt. I'm the Operations Manager at Southwark Council for the income section. So I primarily deal with council tax recovery, business rates, housing benefit overpayment, some sundry debt, and former tenant arrears. Within the service, we have a single view of the customer's debt, and we try and make one arrangement with a customer to cover multiple different debts that they owe with us, which gives us insight and more sort of profiling of the customer's behaviours. In the last 6 months, we've been working more with different groups and partners to try and set up sort of more ways of identifying vulnerability of our customers and providing more support and help where we can.
Thanks very much, Charlotte. Lietta.
Good morning. So my name's Lietta Pennucci. I'm the Senior Operations Manager at Intrum. My role is to look after all of the operational support teams. So relevant to this session is our vulnerability team. Over the last 6 months, we have obviously seen a massive change with uncertainty with regards to income. So we've been working with a lot of customers to look at extended breathing spaces, reduce payment plans, and just trying to work out what's the right outcome for the customers during this time.
Thanks very much, Lietta. And Erik, tell us more about your organisation, Cheddr, but also the work that you do on the consumer panel.
Yeah, thanks, Vanessa. So Erik Porter, a financial educator, consumer advocate, and a consultant. I've been working with a number of banks on implementing, forbearance programs and helping all of the consumers recently with the impacts of the pandemic. But I'm here today as, and in addition to doing financial education with Cheddr, I'm here today as a member of the Financial Services Consumer Panel. So we've been really busy in the last 6 months, as you would imagine, with all of the guidance that's coming out from the FCA, what seems like on a weekly basis now around all of the various products. Our role is really about making sure that the consumer's voice is heard within the FCA. So every piece of policy that comes out of the FCA has to make a stop at the consumer panel. So we're given an opportunity to comment on changes to pensions, to changes on any kind of forbearance guidelines, all of the payment deferral and payment holiday work that you've seen recently. So and because we are comprised of a number of people who have lots of different jobs in the industry, we're able to give them a good view of what's happening with consumers. which hopefully means the guidance that you're getting, albeit you haven't been given long to implement it recently and everything's been very, very fast, that hopefully it makes sense and is balancing both the needs of the industry with the consumer.
That's great, Erik. I suspect we may get lots of questions that pinpointed at your good self. So we'll try and spread that across the three of you. So welcome. Okay, so let's start with our first question. So what role do you see technology have in assessing affordability and identifying vulnerable customers? And what sort of shift have you seen since lockdown? Who wants to start us off there?
I don't mind jumping in with this one. So, yeah, we at Intrum definitely believe that technology has a massive role to play. We're seeing certainly an increase in customer demand to be able to communicate digitally, whether that be through chatbots, self-service portals, 24-hour hotlines. And we're really seeing that once someone starts the journey digitally, they want to be able to continue that. So it's important that there's no restraints and that people are able to carry out the whole journey with the use of technology, whether that be completing affordability assessments, notifying us of vulnerabilities and getting responses to that, being able to make payments. So the complete journey, especially since lockdown, we're certainly seeing that there's been restraints with people being able to use traditional methods like posting letters, posting checks, using payment cards. So it's vital that there's options there that through technology that people are able to communicate and, as I say, continue the whole journey with no constraints using technology.
Great, yeah, really good point, Lietta. We haven't really talked about payments, so we've just been talking about the collection activity. So really personal point there. Charlotte.
Sorry, yes. I think it's very key technology in identifying customers' vulnerabilities. For local authorities, particularly in sort of council tax collection, on occasions all we have initially is the customer's name and the address. We know nothing more about them. And in a lot of situations previously, the first notification or awareness that we have of a customer being vulnerable is when we've gone through the statutory process and an enforcement agent is knocking on the customer's door. So it's about what technology we can actually put in place in order to inform us about the customer, their profile, and all the data that we can potentially gather so that we can prevent the customer from getting to that point and identify them at such earlier stages. We're doing some work at the moment with the Vulnerability Registration Service to see if we can identify customers before we even send a reminder notice to them as to their potential vulnerabilities, and also some key work that we're doing with Guy's and St Thomas Trust to identify whether there's also a link between clinical vulnerability and financial vulnerability, and what we can do to engage with customers at an earlier point and identify their needs through technology and through other engagements, so that we can put those customers through a different route and a different path so that they don't end up with enforcement agents knocking at their door.
Erik.
Yeah, so a couple of different answers. I think primarily as the consumer panel, we always worry about fair and consistent outcomes for people, right? So, and we know the complexity that's out there now with the pandemic. We need to create more space for the skilled personnel within collections or debt management operations to address the needs of those consumers. So using technology to move some of that kind of BAU demand somewhere else is really good. But also, most of you are probably really challenged with needing to hire lots of people or drafting in people from other parts of your organization to work with these consumers. And so, the obvious thing is the training and the steep learning curve that a collector for today has. And I think, technology, especially in things like speech analytics and other tools like that, can be really helpful in identifying anything that might have been missed as those individuals are coming up the learning curve. But I would also say I think technology has a role to play, but using technology solely as the way to identify vulnerable customers and making sure that they're getting the right outcome probably doesn't work for any of us at the moment, just because the complexity is so great.
We had a very similar sort of end of the previous conversation about, never losing that human touch and the not solely relying on technology. And I think never more so when it comes to vulnerable consumers. So in terms of, Lietta, I'll come to you with your work at Intrum and looking at sort of the different sectors and the different collection strategies. We know that sort of the definition of vulnerability is broad, but indeed we have different regulators citing different sort of blends or threads of vulnerability. From your perspective, what are the the measuring and identifying vulnerability? What are those different needs across different sectors?
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to vulnerability, we try to take the same approach, and just because it's across different sectors, I think it would be unfair for the customer to show different levels of empathy or different levels of outcomes. And I think if there is a vulnerable situation, it's about understanding it, understanding the impact, and then making the right decision based on what the customer needs, and not necessarily because of the sector that it sits in. So for us, it's kind of a one approach to vulnerability, and then the different outcomes based on what we've understood.
Okay. And in terms of the technology, different techniques or just one and all the same?
I mean, Erik touched on it, the speech analytics, that's something that we use quite heavily. So it can score 100% of calls against predefined queries that we've built in that may be relevant to different sectors, but generally it looks at trigger words that we can then look at the identification of vulnerability and then pass it through to our specialist customer care teams so that they can then look at the different options available and how we can support the customer.
Thank you. So as well as looking at vulnerability, let's just talk about affordability. So in terms of technology and affordability, start with you, Charlotte. Is there a bigger opportunity, do you feel, in local government in terms of technology with affordability?
Yes, there is. I mean, we're all hearing about open banking, and I'm aware that you've got a session about open banking next, so I'm not going to talk too much about it. But I think that there are tools available that will help people assess affordability now. But I think there's still an element of mistrust from customers about the technology that we would be using. And I think with open banking, I think for us personally, we need to see more figures about how this is being used within the debt advice agencies, and potentially whether it's a stumbling block to customer engagement if the customers feel that they don't necessarily want us to see all the ins and outs of their finances. And that there's a mistrust about how some of that information might be used, I feel. For affordability, I think it's primarily about having a consistent approach across sectors in how we actually deal with affordability. I mean, we use the Money and Pension Service Standard Financial Statement. I know a lot of other local authorities, debt advisors and creditors do use it. But it's also whether we then approach the spending guidelines in the same way. And also how we look at the affordability and the priority of debts. So we will always look to ensure that a customer has the affordability to maintain their ongoing commitments, be they to the local authority or to other sectors, before we then start looking at arrangements on the arrears. We don't necessarily put our arrears ahead of other people's.
Thanks, Charlotte. Erik?
Yeah, so a couple of things on this one. So I think affordability now, especially with the ever-changing income profile of people, whether that's government support and furlough. So affordability is becoming a bit of a cottage industry as we try to move people through forbearance programs and those things. So I think technology absolutely has a role to play, because otherwise we're going to be spending hours on the phone working through this information with consumers. I also think the other opportunity is around the portability of that information. So yes, open banking helps us, but trying to minimize, consumers needing to tell their story over and over again to every creditor, to every debt advice agency. And for me, if there's one thing that I think we've cracked the ability to use technology to do a simple I&E. What I don't think we've cracked completely is that portability angle. And actually, I think that's more important for the consumer, because it can be quite stressful to need to go through that story 15 times if you've got 15 different creditors.
It came up on a session earlier. I think it's how do we get, one organisation's, completed I&E to be accepted across, if we're all organisations using, the standard financial statement. So, yeah, it's a really good point. I know there are organisations that are doing that directly with consumers, but actually, what is that appetite to accept that from, rather, well, no, actually, you need to sort of fill in our version of it. It's a bit like a CV versus an online application form, isn't it? How many people have groaning at the thought of completing an application form, just say, could I not just send you my CV? And similar concerns, I guess. Lietta, from your perspective.
Yeah, I think Vanessa, on that, if I could just come back in. Sorry, slight delay on the line, apologies. So I think there are a number of organizations popping up to handle this kind of portability issue. I fear we are going to end up a little bit like Netflix, Amazon Prime, and Sky. I need 3 subscriptions to do everything. Or the other obvious players would be the credit reference agencies, which people probably will not be too excited to have them doing it. I would really hope that someday, maybe Money and Pension Service, as the issuers of the SFS, this would be a great role for them to play, right? To create a single service around being able to port income and expenditure data. But I will continue to live in hope.
Thanks, Erik. Lietta.
Yeah, I think same as the guys have touched on, really. The idea of open banking is obviously fantastic. It'll be much easier for the customer, but I think there's still some work to do to certainly make sure that customers are comfortable with that. We use API links into the credit bureaus to at times you can validate some parts of the I&Es where you can see a snapshot of the customer's credit file and their total indebtedness over a 12-month period and how much is being repaid to different debts. So yeah, I think that there's some work to do to make sure that it's easy for the customer.
So in terms of, we talked about technology identifying vulnerability, but what about the role of technology to measure the level of customer vulnerability, whether that's sort of transient, longer term? Any thoughts on that, Erik?
Quite a hard thing to do. I think measuring obvious levels of how many people are vulnerable at any given time and the types of vulnerability from an MI perspective, absolutely, technology has a role. I think it's still, for me, the technology probably isn't there yet to grab the nuance and really drill down and to replace some of those individual conversations that have to be had.
Any other thoughts from Lietta or Charlotte on that?
I'd agree with Erik. I think the technology is more about identifying the customer, potentially on the way that we manage the customer, sort of taking it outside of a statutory process. However, you can't beat the interaction with a human and having the more hands-on approach with vulnerable customers. And I think it's a case-by-case basis. And actually looking into the customer's details at a personal level that would then determine that.
Anything from you, Lietta, on that?
No, I think that covers it. It's good for the identification, but we still need the human interaction, like we said.
The key theme from today that we're hearing. So we're seeing some consumers fall into collections for the first time potentially in their financial lives, and becoming vulnerable, but is a term that they never thought they would face. What have you seen in terms of a change in the types of consumers coming through, and do they have different expectations than pre-COVID conversations?
I'll start us off on this one, shall I? So in terms of a local authority, obviously a lot of local authorities put local breathing space in and ceased all recovery activity in the same respect as a lot of other creditors. In terms of sort of new customers that are seeing debt for the first time and becoming vulnerable, I don't think we've seen the bulk of these yet. I think there are a lot more to come as people have been using their savings or that they've been furloughed and they've been still receiving some income. As their situations are changing, I think we're going to see a lot more. In terms of local authorities, we have started to sort of recommence recovery processes with reminders, but everything has changed. Everything is more being issued in a supportive way, and there are a lot more help is available. We're also potentially looking at not necessarily demanding or collecting within the financial year and extending arrangements into the next financial year, whereas previously it all would have been very sort of centric to this financial year. So I think there is a lot of help, and I think people are engaging with that help more than they used to as well.
That's really good to hear, Charlotte, isn't it? Because I think there's been a perception in the past of, don't speak to them, hopefully it'll get better. And that's definitely, I think we've got an opportunity with COVID to really challenge that and get consumers really comfortable with reaching out digitally or telephony. Erik, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, some of the clients I've been working with, I think that, the biggest change has just been the level of uncertainty, right? It used to be a person would call in, they might have some level of, well, I know I can get another job in 1 month, 2 months, whatever it is. And now they don't have that. And they also don't know, with local restrictions and lockdowns and things like that, from 1 week to the next, how their business or pay will be impacted. So, and I think that's been particularly difficult, for actually the collectors or the people speaking to the customers, because they probably have a set of policies sitting next to them that says something like, if you're in short-term difficulty, do this. If it's long-term difficulty, do that. And the definition of short and long term out the window, and the definition of what we're going to do is also changing every day. So I think that's become particularly difficult.
Yeah, our frontline collectors certainly have had a challenge on their hands, and I'm sure operationally it's been quite a challenge to keep on top of. Can you do this today, and can you do this tomorrow? Lietta, is that your experience?
Yeah, definitely. It's been very difficult for them, not only dealing with sort of a different aspect on the calls, but actually themselves moving the shift, a lot of them having to work from home, and it just being a different environment for the representatives themselves. But yeah, we're certainly seeing a lot of customers even pre-default sort of falling into arrears. So we've been trying to come up with initiatives such as freezing arrears when we can, to not put them into a further financial difficulty moving forward. And like we say, on our communication going out to the customers, sort of COVID-19 caveats, contact us, let us understand your situation. And the contact that we make now, the campaigns are more about understanding what we can do and what payment breaks and extended breathing spaces we can offer, as opposed to, what's the payment arrangements here.
So, I mean, we talked there about sort of identification at the point that somebody comes into a collections journey, and then the affordability. But what's the role of technology in maintaining and supporting vulnerable consumers to maintain that engagement? What's that opportunity? We talked about the intrusion of of outbound dialing. We've talked about on previous, how SMS is key, but what's the way to maintain and support and reassure vulnerable consumers whilst they are in a holding position or waiting for, their situation to improve?
Yeah, happy to pick this one up. I think when we think around kind of nudging consumers, I think technology has a massive role to play there in making sure that they just feel like there's someone there, or if they are concerned about it's something that they can pick up the phone and talk to someone. And I also think collections is often one of those things in organizations, depending on how it's done. Some parts of it are outsourced, some parts of it might be internal, and you have potentially different customer experiences. And sometimes for the customer, it might feel like bits of the journey fall down a black hole. And I think technology can really help to make sure that that customer feels like there is an end-to-end process, there is end-to-end support for them, even though in the background, their case or the approach taken by the lender or the council or whoever it happens to be, can differ.
Thanks, Erik. Anything new from your perspective, Charlotte?
Yeah, I think technology does have a role to play. Particularly for local authorities and council tax, we follow quite a rigid statutory process in terms of council tax collection and business rates collection. And I think new technology and tools that are available to us means that we can take these customers outside of that statutory process, and we can do more to support them and manage their cases, give them more sort of reminders, more activity, and as Erik's saying, that personal sort of nudge and touch points that the previous technology and the BAU processes can't afford and can't do. So it's good to be able to sort of put them in a separate area and be able to assist customers more, with the potential of them going back into the normal BAU process, but also with the different touch points and things like tracking the customer's journey and identifying their preference for contacts as well. Some people prefer to contact via web chat or text messaging or telephone calls. So it's understanding their preference, recording that and trying to maintain that through the customer's journey.
Yeah, it's really important, isn't it, where they've stated a preference, look, don't call me, that doesn't work, that you actually honour that and ensure that they Okay. So, Erik, going to come to you and maybe if you give us some insight from your work on the panel. We know that across multiple regulators that the support and the treatment of vulnerable consumers is very high on all of their agendas. From your perspective, what's been the sort of the key themes or potential some frustrations that you've seen in the panel debates that you'd want to share with our audience?
Okay, yeah. I think in terms of the panel debates, actually, you'd be surprised. The group around the table is super pro-consumer, very really encouraging. Sometimes maybe even going too far beyond what any regulator can even possibly do to support. So it doesn't tend to be the debates there so much. Where we spend a lot of time worrying is we know that financial services has been doing a lot in terms of vulnerability, forbearance, whatever might be happening for a long time, right? This has become life long before the pandemic hit. Our worry is really in how are things being managed around with local authorities, within the energy sector, within other sectors, because they may not be as mature in terms of their business model or in terms of their approach. And we know that that has a direct impact, of course, on the financial services sector, but then on all sectors and consumers themselves. And also the inconsistencies when it comes to determining affordability. That's so we, of course, in financial services have a single financial statement. It's generally accepted across places, but that doesn't mean that that's accepted in every part of society, and especially government. There was a recent consultation around government debt management, which we've just responded to. And actually, the broad tone was, you need to do a lot of what the financial services industry has already done, right? Play by the same rules, which I think is consistent with what many organizations have said in terms of breathing space. We had the same debate, getting the government to play along. So it tends to be about that. And then also just making sure that you're not disadvantaged based on the lender. I think there's a general acceptance, high street banks and some of the mid-tier banks, have geared up, they've staffed for this, you've got the technology. Some of those alternative lenders, or payday lenders, specifically, can sometimes be a bit more challenging. And now many of them, or the fintechs, might be finding, just profitability being a problem in the current environment. And so there's even more of a motivation, to maybe sometimes do the wrong thing. And that's what kind of keeps us up at night.
Yeah, it's an age-old challenge, I think, across the sector. And I think, where one regulator leads, others will follow. And I do know that there has been a significant amount of work in the utility space with both regulators leaning on that. I think a lot of the challenges you face in those sectors tend to be because of an ongoing relationship and an ongoing need for those products, and I think that therein lies a challenge to keep those lights on, keep the power on at a time when affordability is so great, and those organisations really trying to do the right thing for their customers and seek affordable arrangements at a time when we know energy and water are obviously absolutely vital. So, yeah, Lietta, I just want to bring you in there from an interim perspective, because you do work across those multiple sectors. Anything you want to sort of come in there?
Yeah, I mean, agreeing with what Erik says, obviously there are different regulations across the different sectors, but financial services we do believe is best practice, so we do adopt that over the other sectors to make sure that we are using the standard financial statement, reviewing affordability in the same way, because we believe it is the best way to do it.
Great. Okay, so we're running really well ahead of time. I know Colin's had a couple of challenges. So, we've just had a question. So yeah, that's great. So, here's a good one. So, do you think there is a proven technology which can help speed up the affordability or even the vulnerability process? Is there a silver bullet out there? And has anybody got it? Oh, I think that may speak for itself. That such a technology was available. I think there are blends and streams and elements. Do we see any one particular organisation or one particular? I mean, we talked about financial services, but are there any, maybe Erik, in the work that you're doing in terms of consulting, that you're seeing some really sort of way ahead best practice? Sorry to put you on the spot.
I probably say no at the moment, and I think, and maybe that speaks to I'm helping probably some organizations who are probably playing a little bit of catch up, so I may not be the best person to ask for that one.
Okay. It's a really challenging area, isn't it? Because vulnerability isn't binary. It is multiple shades of I won't say grey. That's definitely not the right colour. Lietta, anything from your perspective that you're seeing coming down the line that you think actually this could really help?
Yeah, so we're recently, I think Charlotte mentioned it earlier as well, that they're looking into the same, so the vulnerability register, which potentially, as we mentioned, when a customer is unknown to you, it may be able to kickstart that conversation if they have signed up and they have put a flag that there is a potential vulnerability there. So it could help with that conversation, help to make sure that the account is placed in the right stream from the offset, and not going down a strategy that wouldn't be appropriate for a vulnerable customer. But I think there's still a lot of work to do to be able to get more information and to be able to continue with that journey in the right way without any sort of intervention.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Jason Stockley has summed it up really nicely. Everybody has vulnerabilities of a kind. So shouldn't the focus be with how we work with all our customers to understand their needs and preferences, which requires a good conversation? We should do the right thing for all our customers, vulnerable or not. Absolutely. And I think, the art of conversation, whether that's a digital conversation, face-to-face conversation, or a voice conversation, is exactly that. It's about that ability to listen and hear those signals. And I think that's a real challenge that many organisations face, because you're quite often in a process methodology, sort of you need to extract information, but that ability to listen and absorb and pick up on quite subtle triggers is a real art. And I'm not sure technology is ever going to replace the human ear for that. So, well, look, Mr. Sunak has made his announcement. So I think what we'll do is we'll bring this session to a close, give everybody who's on the session a bit of time to go and see what the breaking news is. I'll hand over now to Colin, who will remind us of arrangements for the next session. But for now, I just want to say thank you to Lietta, Mark and Charlotte for a really interesting conversation, and we await that silver bullet in the future. So thanks very much, guys.
Cheers, Vanessa. Hopefully you can hear me. I've had some technical issues. Just wanted to see if I can share this poll, one final poll. And it was just to see if any of you companies who are tuning in today currently use any affordability or vulnerable customers technology at the moment. Real simple answers on there: yes, no, yes, no, or considering. So yeah, that's gone out there now, I believe. Hopefully, the wonders of technology haven't failed me on this side. And yeah, just to re-emphasize, really thanks, lots of thanks to Charlotte, Lietta, Erik. Some really good, interesting stuff there. Yeah, appreciate your time today, and of course, thanks to Vanessa. We're going to log out to the next session, which starts at 12:30, and hopefully we can get some good news from Rishi as well within the next 10-20 minutes or so for everybody out there. So take care, everybody. I'm going to end this off now. Thanks a lot, and goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.